Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I just wanted to express my undying gratitude to all of those who commented and viewed my last Game of Thrones video. I kind of made it 8 months ago just sort of I was kind of going through some stuff and it just kind of kept me busy. And I really didn't expect this channel to nearly blow up to the extent that it has. So thank you all so much for watching and viewing and commenting. I truly appreciate it. I really didn't expect this, but I'm going to do the best I can from here on out. So welcome to episode 1 of GOT Rewrite, a series where rather than review the final season of Game of Thrones as a whole or episode by episode, I plan to feature a single character per episode and break down their arc throughout the entire series, discuss where I feel the writers sent their arc astray, and finally how they could have done it to match up with each character's final fate. Now before I begin, I want to lay out some quick guidelines I plan to follow for each episode of this series. Rule number 1, I'm going to try to change as little as possible. I don't want this series to turn into some sort of fan fiction expo, even though that's probably what it's going to turn into, let's be honest here. But I am going to do my best to keep the general chain of events, yes, that includes Season 8, the same, and only making changes that I think the show writers could have done throughout the series to make their final season less of a cataclysmic train wreck of drop plot lines, massive swings in established character development, or just whatever the fuck the whole elephant thing was. Like, someone wrote this dialogue, dude, And the fact that I feel that some small tweaks could have drastically improved the final season is what makes it that much more disappointing. The fact had they made an addition here, an omission there, simply restructuring a character arc ever so slightly at an earlier stage of the show, and the finale could have been immeasurably more satisfying. Rule number 2, I'll try my best to leave the books out of my analysis. I feel like I may have gone a bit overboard on my last video in comparing the show to the book series. In the books, in the book, in the books, in the books, in the book, in the books, in the book, not in a later book, books in the book, in the book, in the book. Now I feel this was necessary in Tyrion's case since I believe the Tysha confession is absolutely essential to Tyrion's character arc, but I don't recall any moments like that for the other characters. If I do while I'm writing the scripts, I'll make sure to include them. Rule number 3, no fan theories. As much of a fan theory enthusiast that I am, I'm going to try to keep my commentary on them to a minimum, since none of these things are confirmed by either the show or the book series. This also means I won't be doing any speculating on what the hell the Night King's intentions were. I'm just going to put that baby to rest and be done with it. Actually, quick little rant. You can't just introduce temporal paradoxes into your fantasy series and then just completely drop it. Perhaps I'll consider doing a series on fan theories in the future, but as of now, I'm going to stay away from them in this series. And rule number 4, fuck Dorne. I literally sat down and tried to write some sort of explanation as to how I could make the Dorne storyline fit into the events of the show without it being an absolute back alley abortion. And you know what? I'm done. I'm not going to mention it. I'm basically going to pretend the entire plot line never even happened, which is basically what the writers want us to believe anyway by season 7, so yeah. However, I am going to keep in Myrcella's death, so I'll just assume she was killed in a tragic elephant-related accident or something, which explains why Cersei wanted the Golden Company to bring... I don't know, whatever, fuck it. The subject of our first episode is fan favorite, or at least he was, Tyrion Lannister. Now when it comes to established character development shitting the bed, Tyrion pretty much takes the cake. He basically hasn't done anything of note since the end of season 4. His motivation for bringing Dany to the Seven Kingdoms doesn't actually make any sense. We'll get to that. His intelligence in relation to political strategy and scheming has completely evaporated, and for whatever reason he all of a sudden decided that, hey, maybe my Looney Tunes sister, who has pretty much decimated anyone that has crossed her path, and has openly called for my death on multiple occasions, well, maybe she'll actually be cool this one time, and we can totally count on her to come through for us. Now, I think most fans can agree that things started to go awry for Tyrion as soon as he fled King's Landing at the conclusion of season 4. However, I think it's best we quickly recap Tyrion's arc up to that point to understand where his character arc should have gone based on just basic story structure and thematic consistency. But before we do this, I just want to feature a quote from George R.R. Martin in reference to Tyrion. When asked by an interviewer back in 1999 about who his favorite character of his book series is, he states, "I've got to admit I kind of like Tyrion Lannister. He's the villain, of course. But hey, there's nothing like a good villain." Now, I just want you to keep this in mind. This is not only coming from the man himself, George R.R. Martin, but it was also in 1999, just after the release of A Clash of Kings, the second book in the series. For you non-book readers, this means that George said this pretty much at the end of season 2. right after we see Tyrion heroically saving the people of King's Landing at the Battle of Blackwater. But then why does George refer to him as a villain? That will become crystal clear pretty soon. So let's begin. In Season 1, Tyrion is portrayed as a likable, but not necessarily heroic character. He enjoys a hedonistic lifestyle of whores and wine. Though initially portrayed as a mostly laid-back and humorous man, it is made apparent that his disposition is in part a mask for his sardonic worldview. Looked down upon by society due to his stature, Tyrion has no qualms in recognizing the world as a cold, cruel place. However, despite his cynicism, and as evident due to his kindness toward Bran, Jon, and the men of the Night's Watch, a life spent being looked down upon has instilled in him, as he puts it,
tender spot in my heart, cripples, bastards, and broken things.
And despite the less than warm reception he receives from his father and sister, he holds a deep affection for his brother Jaime, within whom the devotion is mutual, as well for his nephew Tommen and his niece Myrcella. His other nephew Joffrey, however, not so much. Now, as I said, Tyrion is extremely likable and charismatic, but again, not exactly heroic. Aside from his moments of empathy to those less fortunate, most of his actions throughout the first season are driven by self-preservation. And despite the fact that he is seen as a pariah by his father and sister, he still holds loyalty to his family, as is evident when he implies he may know the truth behind Bran Stark's near-fatal fall from the abandoned tower.
My dear brother, there are times you make me wonder whose side you're on.
My dear brother, you wound me. You know how much I love my family.
But by the end of the season, he is able to prove to his father and the Lannister army higher-ups that his intelligence has use beyond merely dishing out quick-witted remarks, and in a surprising decision from Tywin, Tyrion is made Hand of the King. Tywin's motives for doing so initially seem cloudy. Is he secretly warming up to Tyrion, or is he merely making the best of a bad situation? In any case, Tyrion is just as surprised as we are and travels to King's Landing. Season 2 begins with Tyrion arriving at King's Landing and swiftly using his scheming ways to clear the kingdom of a few nuisances, as well as drive his sister Cersei up the fucking wall. Tyrion proved himself more than capable of performing in the realm of politics. But again, Tyrion isn't exactly motivated by pursuing the greater good at this point. Whether it is a thinly veiled attempt to prove to his father and the rest that he is worth a damn, or he just revels in causing disruption to the small council, Tyrion's success as Hand of the King is more self-serving, at least in the beginning. But as the War of the Five Kings escalates, Tyrion realizes that the people of King's Landing are in dire need of solid leadership, as Joffrey isn't exactly too proficient at boosting morale, and he starts to take his position more seriously as he preps King's Landing for an attack led by Stannis Baratheon. And in a masterful culmination of his arc over the last 2 seasons, Tyrion rises to the occasion and becomes the leader the people need in their darkest hour. Following Stannis' failed siege on King's Landing, Tyrion decides to stay rather than flee with his lover Shae, finally finding a sense of self-worth in his political career. But unfortunately, this doesn't last long. As soon as Season 3 begins and Tywin returns to King's Landing, Tyrion is stripped of his newfound power and not given a single ounce of gratitude from virtually anyone in the kingdom, despite the fact the walls surely would have fallen had it not been for him. He is made master of coin by his father, yet this is much to his displeasure as the crown is deep in debt, and he is also arranged to marry Sansa Stark, much to his dismay. Over the course of the season, it is made quite evident that despite all he has done for the kingdom and its family, Tyrion is, and, following the assassination of Robb and Catelyn Stark at the Red Wedding, will most likely always be Tywin's bitch. But hey, at least it can't get any worse, right?
I don't know.
Following Joffrey's murder at the Purple Wedding, Tyrion is accused and tried in what basically amounts to a kangaroo court, where he sees himself humiliated and betrayed by pretty much everyone, including his closest confidant, kinda, but we'll bring him up later, and his lover Shae. He sees the people he risked everything for turn on him in an instant, gleefully calling for his execution. Scorned and alone, Tyrion delivers probably one of the most badass speeches in TV history, wishing death to the people of King's Landing, and by God does he fucking mean it. On the eve of his execution, Tyrion is released from his cell by Jaime and, well, you know what's coming. I'm gonna do a quick overview of the Tysha confession, so if you've already watched my other Tyrion video, feel free to skip to this part of the video so you don't have to hear me lisping my way through it all over again. In the show, Tyrion is released by Jaime, but before he flees, he decides to pay his father a visit. He ascends to the Tower of the Hand and finds Shae, his former lover, in his father's bed. Tyrion kills Shae in self-defense, and then confronts his father and murders him. But in the book, when Jaime releases Tyrion, he confesses to him that Tysha, Tyrion's first wife, who Tyrion has been led to believe was a whore paid by Jaime and a ploy for Tyrion to lose his virginity, was in fact not a whore, and her and Tyrion's love was real. The cover story of her being a whore was manufactured by Tywin. At this point in the narrative, Jaime is the only person in the world who Tyrion still loves. But following Jaime's confession, Tyrion chastises his brother and swears revenge. Tyrion no longer has anyone in his life whom he holds dear, and his only purpose in life is that of revenge. He then climbs to the Tower of the Hand and, just as in the show, finds Shae in his father's bed. However, in the book, there is no self-defense. Tyrion just straight up murders her. He confronts his father asking him where Tysha is. When Tywin refers to her as a whore, Tyrion kills him. Now, in my initial video, I theorized as to why the writers omitted the Tysha confession. Some of you in the comments made the great observation that the reveal may have been removed due to the fact that in the show, Tysha is only mentioned once towards the end of season 1, whereas in the books, since they're POV, Tysha is mentioned many times throughout the novels through Tyrion's inner monologue. Because of this, the Tysha confession may have seemingly come out of nowhere since she hadn't been brought up in 3 whole seasons. My initial theory was that they removed the reveal because they didn't want to turn Tyrion into as dark of a character as he is in the books, and boy does he get dark. The show writers instead wanted to keep him as a character the viewers could root for. But after reassessing, I realized that the show writers still could have made him turn over to the dark side, what with him being betrayed by the people of King's Landing and Shae. However, I realized upon reanalyzing my first video that my most pressing objection to the removal of the confession had nothing to do with Tyrion or Tysha at all. It was all about Jaime. In the show, Tyrion and Jaime are still on good terms when Tyrion flees King's Landing. But the most essential and important development of the Tysha confession is the fact that Jaime and Tyrion's relationship is severed. I'm going to explain why later in the video, but for now let's move on. In Season 5, Tyrion arrives across the Narrow Sea and is tasked by Varys with finding and offering his services to Daenerys Targaryen. He locates her and proves himself as a worthy advisor by holding down the fort at Slaver's Bay while she was held captive by the Dothraki in Season 6. Dany makes him her hand and they make their way to Season 7. So it's the general consensus that Tyrion's character took a nosedive following Season 4, and the reason is that his inner motivation really isn't that apparent, or at the very least doesn't ring true. In Seasons 1 through 4, Tyrion's motivation in each season is crystal clear. At the risk of oversimplifying the craft of storytelling, a character's arc is all about their motivation. Arya wants revenge. Dany wants the Iron Throne. Their individual goals during the journey may change, and their feelings regarding the pursuit of that goal may shift, but the motivation is the skeleton onto which the character is built. A sudden shift or lack of motivation can absolutely derail a well-built character. I wonder if that reminds me of something. The reason Tyrion's character arc fails is because we have no sense of what his inner motivation is in bringing Dany to rule the Seven Kingdoms. Sure, he wants revenge on Cersei, but then again, this is kind of nerfed when he all of a sudden wants her to surrender peacefully come Season 7, but whatever. However, in the show, Tyrion makes it pretty explicit as early as Season 5 that he at least partially wants Dany to be a just ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. But wait, you may say, isn't this his motivation? He wants Dany to come and rule to bring peace to the Seven Kingdoms. So what's the problem?
I wish I was the monster you think I am. I wish I had enough poison for the whole pack of you. I would gladly give my life to watch you all swallow it.
The question is, why does Tyrion want to bring Dany to the Seven Kingdoms to rule peacefully? It doesn't really make that much sense. Tyrion should realistically want Dany to ride Drogon the fuck over there and burn them the fuck down. Yeah, we saw Tyrion was selfless at the Battle of Blackwater, but that was before the very people he risked his life for turned on their heel and stabbed him in the back. Given Tyrion's underlying cynical nature and the fact that being betrayed by pretty much everyone in his life drove him to the brink of insanity, it would make far more sense that Tyrion would just say fuck it and want revenge on those who cast him aside. But, and this goes back to my original video, the writers didn't want him to do that. They didn't want him to transform into a darker character. Audiences love when bad characters turn to good guys. And to be completely frank, doing so isn't nearly as difficult as doing the opposite. Although I can think of one particular example where doing so turned out pretty well. So because Tyrion has no clear motivation following Season 4, this is why his character gets pushed to the side. But what if we did keep the darker Tyrion? What if instead of wanting to bring Dany to Westeros to rule justly, what if his lust for revenge overtook him? What if he wanted her to lay waste to King's Landing and quench his thirst for revenge? Instead of trying to bring her to the middle, he filled her head with stories of the cruel Lannisters, of the Red Wedding, of the cruelty of King Joffrey, and the death of an honorable man such as Ned Stark. Perhaps it would be enough to put the thought into Dany's head that sometimes fire and blood is the only thing that evil people deserve. She clearly thought this way in the past with the slave masters of Slaver's Bay when she decided to crucify them, showing that her concept of justice seems to be a little off balance. Now, of course, we don't want to see Tyrion turn to a darker character, but it is the logical path that his arc would take, or at least more logical than whatever the hell he's doing following season 4. This also answers my second biggest question I raised in my original Tyrion video. If Tyrion did want Dany to bring peace to the Seven Kingdoms, why did he, a man known for his social intelligence and his ability to read people, think that Dany would be the one to do it? He even alludes to knowing what sort of ruler she truly is in this scene in season 5.
So, here we sit. Two terrible children of two terrible fathers.
I'm terrible.
I've heard stories.
Now we'll go over Dany's characterization more in depth in my next video, but the general consensus is that in the books is that Dany isn't nearly as magnanimous as the show makes her out to be in seasons 1 through 6. This is also in part due to the fact that the show doesn't showcase her inner monologues, but the whole point of adapting for the screen is to convey these inner thoughts in a visual way. Anyway, back on topic. So if we change Tyrion's motivation to be that of revenge on the people of King's Landing, this actually answers the second question. Tyrion does know what sort of ruler Dany truly is. In fact, he's counting on her to raise hell at King's Landing. I mean, come to think of it, is there even a single person who, if they got burned alive, he would actually care at King's Landing? Well, there are actually a couple, but we're actually going to get to them later. So Tyrion follows Dany to Westeros at the beginning of season 7. Now in the show, he tries to convince her to win over the people before she takes King's Landing. This leads to a bunch of shitty strategic decisions made by Tyrion, which completely undermine the intellect he displayed in the earlier seasons. But in our rewrite, seeing as though the only thing Tyrion wants is revenge, what if he tries to convince Dany to attack King's Landing immediately? He has received word that Cersei has named herself queen following Tommen's death. Just ride all 3 dragons there in the morning and burn the Red Keep to the ground. But wait, that would basically mean the show would be wrapped up in like 2 episodes. Why wouldn't she just do that? Well, what if there was someone else besides Tyrion who tried to convince Dany to win over the people before she took King's Landing? Who tried to convince her to be a just ruler and show the people she wasn't like her crazy Targas father? I can't even begin to tell you how much I would pay to see a season 7 where instead of Tyrion making dumbass decisions, we saw a battle of wits between him and Varys. Think of them as the angel and devil on her shoulders, with Varys trying to keep her on the straight and narrow, while Tyrion is trying to convince her to embrace her inner Targaryen. We got a little taste of the political turmoil between Tyrion and Varys in episode 4 of season 8, and personally, I thought it was one of the highlights of the season, really embracing the roots of what separated the show from other fantasy series to begin with. As a side note, Varys is a perfect example of the straight line motivation I was discussing earlier. Throughout the run of the series, and even though they nerfed his character in the last few seasons, his main goal has always been constant.
Who do you truly serve?
The realm, my lord.
You know where my loyalty stands. You know I will never betray the realm.
So in our rewrite of season 7, we see the 2 smartest men in Westeros, former friends and quasi-allies, going head to head in trying to manipulate the most dangerous woman in Westeros. Now that is a season 7 that I would pay to see. And we can even connect this back to the events of the show. After realizing he is losing his influence on Dany to Tyrion, Varys, after learning of Jon Snow's true heritage, tries to go behind Tyrion's back to oust Dany as the heir to the throne. But due to Sansa revealing the truth to Tyrion, he betrays Varys, which leads to his execution. This would also be a great parallel back to season 4, where it was Varys who testified against Tyrion. Upon Varys' death, this leaves Tyrion as the sole influence on Dany, and is what leads her to commit the atrocity on King's Landing. Tyrion has become the villain that George R.R. Martin spoke of, the outcast whose thirst for revenge overcame his more empathetic sensibilities and turned him into a monster. Now the question is, would fans have liked this? And to be honest, I'm not sure. I imagine it would have been heartbreaking to see a likable and sympathetic character turn over to the dark side, but I do believe it's what would make sense in regards to Tyrion's arc. But now the question remains, what about Tyrion's redemption? Does he deserve one after all he's done? After convincing Dany to lay waste to those who scorned him at the end of season 4, after betraying Varys? How could we possibly give Tyrion a redemption, and where would we possibly fit it in? Well, how about this?
You idiot. You
I talked about in my first video how I felt this scene didn't really make a lot of sense. Now, my original complaint was how he didn't really do anything to stop Jaime in the moment, but a lot of commenters pointed out that, well, I mean, like, what could he possibly have done to stop it? He was already charging at Dany and whatnot, so there's not much he could have really done. But after some reassessment, I realized I really didn't clarify my objection as well as I could have. The point wasn't that Tyrion didn't do anything to stop him in the moment. The point was that how could Tyrion not realize that this was inevitable? When Tyrion flees King's Landing, he and Jaime are still on good terms. So because of this, Tyrion brings Dany across the Narrow Sea to overthrow his sister, who Tyrion knows is queen at this point, and also knows that Jaime is part of her Queensguard, and also knows that Jaime loves Cersei more than anything and would most likely defend her to the death. And he also knows that Jaime was the one who killed Dany's father. So regardless of the direction that Tyrion's arc takes, whether he wanted to bring Dany to Westeros to rule justly or to wreak havoc, how could Tyrion possibly think that Jaime would make it out alive? Tyrion must have known that bringing Dany to Westeros would be a death sentence for him. And this is why I feel the Tysha confession is essential. By severing Tyrion and Jaime's relationship, it fills in this plot hole. I don't believe that Tyrion would have brought Dany across the Narrow Sea without making sure that Jaime would be safe from her wrath. Or at the very least, once they landed at Westeros, perhaps Tyrion could have sent word to Jaime, basically being like, hey bro, Dany and her 3 dragons just landed in Westeros, and our crazy-ass sister surely won't surrender on her own accord. Maybe you should use some of that Queensguard PTO time you have saved up and, take a hike for a while. But if Tyrion wanted revenge on Jaime, just as he did on Cersei and the people of King's Landing, well fuck it, have Dany burn them all. And come to think of it, this also goes for Tommen and Myrcella. Did anyone else think it was odd that Tyrion was shown being a loving uncle to them both, and yet we didn't get to see his reaction to their deaths? Yeah, he apologized to Cersei late in Season 7, but what would Tyrion's reaction be to learning of Myrcella's death, seeing as he was the one who sent her to Dorne back in Season 2? He must have felt immense guilt knowing he was the one to send her to Dorne, only to be killed by the Sand Snakes. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant killed in a tragic elephant accident. This sort of development could be used to make Tyrion reconsider his actions and his revenge, or it could have been used to send him deeper into despair. But by just not utilizing it, the writers left a solid storytelling device on the table and didn't do a thing with it. So let's recap. Tyrion lands across the Narrow Sea at the beginning of Season 5. He makes his way to Dany and convinces her to let him join her army, all the while trying to steer her to attack King's Landing immediately, so he can attain his revenge. However, Varys and him butt heads, with Varys trying to steer Dany towards a more diplomatic approach. This leads to Varys trying to overthrow Dany when he realizes she's starting to go a little Targ psycho, which in turn gives Tyrion a chance to betray Varys, which leads to his execution. But somewhere along the way, whether it was a sudden change of heart upon seeing Jaime nearly killed by Drogon, or perhaps learning of the deaths of Tommen and Myrcella, making him reassess whether or not he's doing the right thing, Tyrion begins to realize what his thirst for vengeance has made him unleash upon his former home. And despite his best efforts to rectify the damage, events have already been set in motion. The seed in Dany's mind has been planted, which all culminates in Dany's destruction of King's Landing, which is precisely what Tyrion had wished for during his trial. He has attained his revenge, but at what cost? His brother and sister are dead, Tommen and Myrcella as well. Tyrion remains as the sole living Lannister. And now we come to the series finale. Tyrion walks through the rubble and approaches Dany on the steps of King's Landing. And it is here, not at the end of Season 6, that Dany should make Tyrion her hand, as he has proven his loyalty to her beyond all else. This would also serve as a great bookend, with Tywin making him hand at the end of Season 1. Tyrion has attained everything he wanted. He has accomplished his revenge on his family and the people of King's Landing, and despite his father's assertion that Tyrion was the lowest of the Lannisters, he is in fact the only one left standing. Now Tyrion can conquer the world with Dany, attaining a power he never thought possible. But as we know about Tyrion, beneath his cynicism, beneath his hedonism, there is a person who, when the time calls for it, will sacrifice himself for the greater good, just as he did at the Battle of Blackwater. Realizing what awaits the rest of the world if Dany is left to her own devices, he knows what he must do. Dany hands Tyrion the hand of the Queen Pin, and Tyrion responds by driving it into her neck, killing Dany in front of Jon, Grey Worm, and her entire army, in order to spare the world the same fate he has brought to King's Landing. In doing so, we see a parallel between Jaime killing Aerys at the end of Robert's Rebellion, in order to save the people of King's Landing. But this time, a Lannister must kill a Targaryen to save the rest of the world. As Dany dies, Tyrion is caught and dragged away. But as for his fate, Well, you guys are just going to have to wait a little bit for his resolution, as it's related directly to Jon's ultimate fate. I know some may have wanted it to end with Jon killing Dany as it did in the show, but honestly, I never really thought this entire plot was handled well. It all seemed very contrived to set up for the final conflict. And come to think of it, the show already hit the I must kill what I love in order to uphold my duty character beat when Ygritte died in season 4. So it just seems like they're retreading development here. I think Tyrion killing Dany holds a lot more weight and is a lot more thematically consistent. Tyrion turns into a darker character, but in the end commits his most selfless act in the series, killing Dany to spare the world from her wrath, even if it means having his name disgraced in the history books. Let me know what you guys think in the comments about this analysis and rewrite of Tyrion's arc. In the comments of the last video, you guys gave me tons of new insights and ideas about Tyrion's arc, which has influenced this video. Perhaps once we're done with all the individual character videos, we can do one massive final video, putting the new arcs all together and sort of restructuring Season 8 as a whole, to see if we can do it a little bit better. But for now, next video up is the Queen herself, Daenerys Targaryen. Her rewrite's gonna be a bit more subtle than Tyrion's, as I felt as though the backbone for her arc was there in the show, but the execution of her development was handled poorly throughout the series, which led to a rather rushed character change in the final season. I wanted to try to get these videos out weekly, but with work and whatnot, I think 2 weeks is a more realistic time frame, especially considering I want to make sure the scripts are non-rushed and are of high quality. So once again, thank you guys so much. Leave any comments and critiques you may have. Thanks for sticking around, and episode 2 will be on its way.